Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm Devyani Chaturvedi, research analyst at ISAS, and I will be your host for today's episode. Nepal has erupted into turmoil as the younger generation poured into the streets in protest of a sweeping social media ban. What began as a stand for digital freedom quickly morphed into a broader revolt against political corruption, economic malaise, and entrenched government and governance failures. With buildings aflame, dozens killed or injured, and the Prime Minister forced to resign, the army has stepped in to restore order. Nepal's future hangs in a balance with questions to its legitimacy. To deconstruct and better understand what is going on in Nepal, joining me today is Dr. Pushpa Sharma, a visiting senior research fellow at ISAS. Welcome, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Devyani.
So let's quickly get to the point of it. To begin with, could you just walk us through exactly what has unfolded in Nepal over the past few days and how did it reach to this point?
Thank you, Devyani. To begin with, it was the social media ban. As you rightly said, that was the trigger for the protest movement. Because the young people, I think, some say 15, some say 18 to 38, and that's called the Generation Z, Generation Z. So that group of independent people, they planned a protest against the banning of the social media. And that was because they felt that banning or say blocking of certain, say 26 in particular social media was an assault on their freedom, on free speech. Because they used to take to social media to discuss, to argue about several issues, including the issues of corruption, including issues of bad governance, against the political class. So they thought that the banning of the social media was also actually to stop the discussions that we were having on social media against the political class. Whereas the government had a different narrative of why it wanted to bring in the companies to register in Nepal, and so it was only a restriction, a temporary restriction. But because the government didn't lift the ban as such, was adamant in getting to the companies, and unless they would come register, that it's not going to lift the ban. These youngsters, they planned the protest movement, and they said it will be a peaceful protest movement. But when they came out on the streets, and before they came out on the streets, actually, when they were planning, they said it's not only about social media ban, but it's also about corruption. It's about their aspirations of good government, good governance. So all these things would definitely come on the street. So the protest actually started in a peaceful manner, but then after a few hours of the protest, the protesters went on to breach police barricades to enter the restricted zones and the parliament building with an effort to storm into the parliament building. So at that point of time, the police, it had taken measures like water cannons and tear gas and all sorts of measures earlier, but they were not going to be helpful. So the police resorted to shooting. But then the use of force in terms of shooting was so excessive that 19 people were killed in a single day, actually in a few hours. And this was unprecedented in Nepal's history. Even in earlier protests and movements, so many people in a single day had not been killed. So this use of force was extremely excessive for sure, and people were angry about it. So what happened was, after this killing, the government imposed curfew, but that didn't work. Protest continued. And in the evening, there was an emergency cabinet meeting where the Home Minister resigned after huge pressure. There was a pressure on the Prime Minister also resigned the same day, but he didn't. And then after the pressure also to lift the ban, to revoke the ban, the government revoked the ban. So from midnight of the first day itself, the social media started functioning again. And my assumption is that once the ban was lifted, although using VPNs and other mediums, some kind of social media use was going on. It was not completely like a blackout, but not among the very large number of people. So when the ban was revoked, the images of the killings, the wounded, and all that transmitted rapidly. And that again added to the grief and the fear and the anger of the people. Rather than fear, it was the anger. So the next day, sensing this, the government again imposed curfews, but that was surely not to work. It was expected it won't work. So the youth again started coming out onto the streets, and they targeted the political leaders' houses, the political leaders themselves, whoever they could find. So they started with that, but then it gradually went on to targeting the public infrastructure and the major ones, like the Parliament building itself, the Supreme Court, the Central Secretariat, Singha Darbar, President's official residence and palace office, the Prime Minister's official residence. I'm like, very few, I think, only have been spared. And then there were questions about why targeting these public infrastructures became such a thing when the demand was not that. The demand was for revoking the ban and the larger issues of end to corruption and for good governance. But the institutions, the buildings as such, and these are historic buildings, some of them, centuries old. So targeting of these actually was quite unprecedented, unexpected, unanticipated. And so different kinds of arguments are being made, assumptions are being made about why this happened. One of them is the protest when it started was, I think, within the hold of the organizers, the young organizers who wanted to do a peaceful one. But there were infiltrations, and not just infiltrations. Now I have started to perhaps think that it might have been hijacked by people with criminal kind of mindset and people who might have wanted to fulfill some of their objectives, political objectives, that they had not been able to do so earlier. If it was only within the young generation of people who started it peacefully and who actually had convened this, then things would not have turned out this bad to what we are seeing today.
I think you've already unpacked quite a bit, but let me try to kind of go a bit deeper and ask more questions about it. So what factors do you think have contributed to this sort of response? We saw, as you narrated, in terms of the sequence of events, but what has been building up? One of the reasons that has come up is the high level of unemployment and frustration amongst the younger generation. And do you think this kind of situation could have been handled differently? Because the premise or the starting of the situation was that they wanted social media companies like TikTok and others to have an office in Nepal, which is a pretty legitimate ask, if you ask me. So if you could just shed a little bit of light on that, then we can proceed with the conversation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll go with the later part of your question. In taking that ban itself, the government said that it was imposing this blocking of the social media sites, 26 of them, which did not include TikTok, by the way, because you mentioned TikTok, so I'm just saying this, because TikTok had registered earlier, so it was functioning. Viber had registered, it was functioning.
I think Meta was...
Not Meta. Meta meaning like Facebook, WhatsApp, they were blocked.
They are not. They don't have
the popular ones like the Facebook, like the Meta, Facebook, WhatsApp, Google, YouTube, they were all blocked. The popular ones had been blocked because
I think
they were
TikTok
not
and another company were working.
Yeah,
they were the only two.
There were two or three. They were working. The others had been blocked. And here there is also a conspiracy kind of narrative that I have been hearing, that it were the US companies that were blocked and not the others, whereas I think there were Chinese companies as well that were blocked. Like WeChat was also blocked, if I'm not wrong. Okay. But the government said that it was necessary to get these companies registered in Nepal in order to regulate them, because social media has also become a platform where all kinds of things are going on. cases have been coming up. And in order to handle those, it's difficult if they don't have a representative. I think the government was not even asking to have an office as such in Nepal. But at least they wanted to get them registered, have a contact person whom they could approach in case of issues, in case legal cases would come in. That was the idea. Now, was the blocking the way to go about it? Sensing that what might come about, there was a group in society and there was a group within the political leadership itself which was against the blocking of the social media sites. Perhaps they might have sensed that what this would come about among the youth in particular, right? Because there were other things also going on. But the government resorted to this. Now, when the government resorted to this, and the youngsters, they planned the protest movement, and then they said that they are going to protest against this and the corruption issues whatsoever, the government should have taken it seriously and made a better plan and better prepared. And there the government lacked preparation because the size of the security force that was deployed, the barricades that were put in place, very close to the parliament building actually, far away from where actually it used to be in earlier kinds of protests, showed a lack of actually seriousness. And also the fact that the Home Minister was attending a parliamentary committee meeting at that time when the protest was going on outside. Shows that the government took it, I think, very lightly. It didn't take it very seriously. Now, why I'm saying that the government should have taken it seriously is it was not only an issue of the social media ban. The youth were frustrated with the issues of, as we talked earlier, corruption and lack of governance for a very long time. And it was all over on social media. And the other thing is, there are also other issues going on within Nepali politics. Lots of discontent and also groups having their own kind of agendas taking forward. Tried to do that earlier but not been very successful. So the government and its intelligence should have an idea of what might come. As perhaps becomes the case in many of these kinds of movements, that you start with one, but then it gets infiltrated, it gets hijacked by the others. That kind of an approach and that kind of a sense is something I see that lacked in the government. And so the preparation was too less, which led to these protesters going to the parliament building and then trying to storm it, and then the killings and whatsoever. Now, why did the vandalism, the arson happen the next day? Now, as I referred to, in a bit very, very briefly earlier, this movement, this protest did not remain in the hands of the peaceful protesters as such when it began in the first day itself. Because even on the first day, I don't think they had thought about going to the parliament and storming it. That would be a violent thing to do. And they had said that they were for peaceful protests. It's understandable when after people come on the streets, then you don't remain to what you were earlier. There is a kind of a pressure built up. There is a kind of a different kind of, the thought process that goes on. And then perhaps you also get excited about things. So that might also be one reason. But it should be that some people already had plans to take it in a very different direction. And that continued even harder and harsher the second day. And what triggered that for the second day was the killing of 19 people, because that had a very huge grief and anger among the larger population. So there was actually an tacit kind of a support from almost everyone. The second day when the youths again started coming out, protesting against the government, defying the curfew. And even, I think, targeting the political leaders' residences. Until that time, I think people were not perhaps surprised at why this was happening. It was expected that after the killings of 19 people, this would happen because it's an outburst. But then the arson that happened with the demolishing of all the three state structures, all the legislative, the executive, as well as the judiciary, everything was targeted. So when this happened, that leads to think that this was perhaps a calculated kind of a quick one, a calculated kind of an approach taken by people with that mindset who thought that this is an opportune time to get things in their favor through the acts of vandalism and chaos of the manner what we saw.
Is this kind of political instability and vacuum a first for Nepal, marking a departure from past trends? Or are we seeing more of the same cycle?
In terms of political vacuum, I think Nepal didn't have this kind of a vacuum earlier. Nepal has been into political struggle actually from the 1950s itself. Once the Rana autocratic rule was over, and then it has been a struggle between the monarchy and democracy at different times, one after the other. But when there was a monarch, there would be the revolution for leadership, and then the democratic parties would take over from the monarch. And then the monarch would take over as a coup later on. Again, the political parties would take up. So there would be someone in charge of the whole state structure, so to say. But at present what we are saying is, it's not that everything is lost. Of course, the infrastructure is lost. There's no government. Once the Prime Minister has resigned now, there's a vacuum. There's no government at all. But there is the President. The President's office residence is burned, but President is there. And the President issued a statement calling to the Genjis for negotiation for the next step forward. And that's the only thing that has happened so far from the President. Otherwise, rest of the things are being taken care of by the army in terms of security, in terms of negotiations with the youngsters. So, in one sense, what you can see is the elected government is not there. The President is not seen. Only a statement has come from him. And army seems to be the only institution that is active at the moment. So that is the kind of a space, whether we call it vacuum of one sense or maybe not of the other, is there. And this kind of a situation is, I think, the first in Nepal's history.
Okay.
This is unprecedented.
With protesters marching into government institutions and even the Supreme Court for that matter, do you think these institutions will continue to function? Do people still have faith in them? Is resuscitation of these institutions even a possibility? And how do you think from this inflection point we will move towards some sort of governance? What would that look like? Because at the moment it seems like that the basic institutions are eroding, and the bureaucracy, which is usually the pillar, another big pillar in society, doesn't seem to be as efficient or as strong as it should be. Media, which is another pillar of democracy, also doesn't seem to be having any lasting impact on the current situation. So when the executive, the judiciary and the bureaucracy are not working, how would institutions function? Will they function?
That's a bigger question, and many things built into the question itself, but I'll try to respond. Well, you see, in terms of the functioning of the institutions, they have to function. There's no way out, right? They have to function. But how will they function? What happens next is the big question. Now, you talked about media. Now, one thing, what perhaps I also have to put it over here is, one of the largest media houses was also targeted and office has been burnt. One of the reasons is there was, anger among the people against the mainstream media as well. And the reason for this is the stoking of hatred against these mainstream media by several groups, including some of the political class. Because of that kind of a hatred among the people, in general, like many of them, they would not buy into what the mainstream media is saying. And the social media, and that's a larger kind of a development that we see across the globe, that social media has become the main source of information, main source of news, rather than the other media. So, I mean, the media is still functioning and then doing its bit, although not in the very normal way as earlier. But it's difficult for the larger, younger people to trust it, because they have actually gone quite far away from depending on the mainstream media and then listening to what they are saying, reading to what's right over there. And in my assessment so far, at least in Nepal, of course, nothing is absolutely, free and fair, and you can't get 100% genuine kind of things from everywhere. Weaknesses are there, strengths are there, but the media largely was still independent, and it was still a very strong body of democracy in the Nepali context. Now, coming to the part of where next and how will these institutions function. Now, see, the infrastructure is gone, and particularly if you look at like two of the places, the Supreme Court and the Central Secretariat, many of the important documents have gone, right? So, regarding the loss of those documents, regarding the loss of data, where will they start from is a very difficult question. I don't know what the next course will be. Buildings, they can be built up. Of course, there's a huge loss in terms of like the property, and then there might be expenses coming up, but they can be built. That's a different thing. But to run the institutions and to take things forward now, what next? Because there is kind of a vacuum now. So what we are seeing now is the new development has been that yesterday the youngsters were called by the army for negotiation. So they went over there. But now the problem is, when you say Gen Z youngsters, the movement was a leaderless movement. And there's not only one group. Youngsters of that age is a huge group, right? And there is no common understanding among them as well.
Yeah.
So from among the, if you can say it, official, in the sense of like who started this peaceful protest movement, they have come to a common understanding, and they have provided a common name of a former Chief Justice as the face of the leader of the new government, the interim government. But there are also other groups who are saying that we are also the youngsters, we are also Gen Z, and we have a different candidate here. So now there is a divide among the youngsters themselves. And so the army has asked them to have a consensus and come with a consensual name. And not only that, there were also reports in the social media that were coming out that the army has also told these youngsters to discuss and negotiate with some other people and some other political classes as well, because saying that they are also the stakeholders of the movement, whereas the Gen Z have been completely against that proposition, where they are saying that they are not stakeholders, this is not what we have looked for. So there is a divide. So what I'm saying is, there is a divide, there is a confusion about who's going to be the leader, whether there can be a consensus, leader. So all this is going to shape the kind of the governance structure Nepal is going to, see in the coming days. The best course of action would have been to find out a solution within the current constitutional framework, the structure, because the parliament is still there. I mean, the building is gone, but the elected representatives are still there. There are parliamentarians, the president is there. So the political parties are there, although their party offices have gone. But the structures are there. So the normal course of things to take this forward would have been to call everyone on board, sit on the negotiating table, find a way out within the constitutional structure and take it forward. But that doesn't look like a possibility at this moment, because even the youngsters, the Gen Zs who started the protest movement, they are against the mainstream political parties, and they have not been talking about this kind of a mechanism to take it forward. So things look very uncertain, and we still have to wait a few more days to see where Nepal is heading to.
I think you've pointed to a very bleak scenario. I think things seem to be moving fast and yet a little too slow to even predict what's going on. But I think the last 1.5 years or a little bit longer don't seem to be doing too well for South Asia in general, because this is, after Bangladesh, Nepal is now like the 4th place where democracy is unstable. If you had to talk a little bit about one thing that regional observers should be watching out for in terms of Nepal or South Asia in general, in terms of its core relationship with democracy, what would be one thing you would tell us to watch out for?
You mean the future of democracy as such, or?
Yeah, the future of democracy in Nepal, and what are maybe 2 or 3 scenarios that could possibly unfold in the next few months, according to you?
Yeah,
obviously understanding that things are too fast-paced,
Yeah.
and by the time we even release this, things could have just changed totally. But still, for the record, I think it would be good to know.
I get your point. We can think of, I think, a few scenarios of where things can go into. In the immediate future, I don't think it's going to go within the framework of existing constitutions with the political parties. I think the next best scenario is the formation of a citizens' government, an interim one, to conduct an election and then hand it over to the elected parliament later on. And that is, I think, the exercise that's going on at the moment. How successful will that be is yet to be seen, and whether that is the course that's going to be taken is to be seen. The other scenarios could be, I mean, if there will not be a consensus candidate to lead the next government coming from the Gen Zs, who is going to take the call after that is the next big question. And the entity that will be that's going to take the call in that case will be having the largest strength for sure in terms of how things will move forward. And what that will be is a very difficult and a complex thing to, I think, unfold at the moment. So what I see is when the first best case kind of a solution is not possible, it doesn't seem possible, the next best is to have a citizen government. I don't know how successful that will be, how effective that will be, but that will be that's the second best. Hold an interim election by 6 months' time, and then hand it over to the elected representative, and then let the country take its course as it was before the protest movement took place. If that doesn't happen, and then the democracy gets derailed, then I think Nepal will again be going back to the same cycle of the fight for democracy and the fight, and then the again that uprooting of democracy, and then again fighting for it. So I think that cycle might come in again if that will be chosen as the path forward. But I sincerely hope that that is not the path that will be chosen. I hope sense will prevail amongst all, and democracy will continue to function. This might be a temporary blip. Perhaps democracy will continue to function. We can wish for that. That's all I think I can say at this moment.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Pushpa, for sharing your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Devyani.
You were listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates from our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X.